Hi everyone, this is our channel, Around My Story. Please like, share and subscribe.
Most people I saw hated and cursed at me, and some treated me more kindly and gently than usual. It was very confusing, to be honest. I didn't know the reason for people's animosity towards me, but I thought perhaps it had something to do with my mother. Before telling my story, let me introduce myself. My name is Maria. I lived in a poor neighborhood fraught with drugs and death. People who lived there were mostly losers. Growing up, people have always looked at me with disdain, for no good reason. People ostracized me. I had no friends, no one to speak to. When I would return home, I'd ask my mother why people didn't like me. She wouldn't answer. She'd just cry and smile sadly. She would often tell me to ignore people's looks. But how can I ignore the looks of everyone around me? It was the biggest mystery in my life. I didn't know if my father was alive or not. The only thing I knew about my father was how he looked, from a picture on our wall. And if I asked about him, my mother would only tell me that he traveled, and he never came back, that she didn't know anything about him, almost as if he were dead. But I suspected that she wasn't telling me the whole truth, and I thought people in our neighborhood knew something I didn't. Perhaps that was the reason they hated me so much. Aside from this problem, I was a clever girl at school. I dreamed of having a good position in life to make my mother proud of me. One day, as I was returning home from school, I felt that someone was following me. I turned around once, but saw no one. The second time I turned around, I saw a man. He was wearing a mask. I was afraid, and I ran home to my mother. She was worried, and she just hugged me. It happened a lot after that. It seemed like everywhere I went, that man just happened to be there. I spent a lot of time thinking about it, who that man could be. Eventually, I graduated and got a job with a well-known company. We left our poor neighborhood and rented a flat in a good area. I had almost forgotten about the mystery man who used to follow me often. Then, one day, a poor man came into my office. He handed me an envelope. Smiling, he told me to say hello to Isabella, then disappeared, leaving me with even more questions. Who was he? And how did he know my mother? I returned home, told her about this man, and showed her the envelope. She looked worried and asked me to quickly open it for her. When I did, I found something unexpected. One old photo of him, and a recent one. I didn't know it then, but that man was my father. And all I did was walk away. I curiously began reading the letter. It said, "Dear Maria, I am sorry for everything. Sorry for the suffering I caused you and your mother. Sorry for not being there with you as you grew up. I hope that you can both forgive me. Please tell Isabella that I never forgot about her, or you. I love you two so much." I looked at my mother. She was holding the photographs and crying quietly. So the mystery man who had often followed me home had actually been my father, watching me from afar. I asked my mother, "Why did you hide the truth from me? Why didn't you tell me where my father was all these years?" She replied, "I was afraid to shock you with the news that your father was in prison for killing someone." And I gasped, "Killing someone?" Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren. Did you ever wonder what it would be like to have your life completely destroyed by someone close to you? Ever thought about what you would do then? I didn't have time to think, because that's exactly what happened to me. It all started 2 years ago. I lived a quiet life with my mom and dad and my sister. I loved my family. We were always together. We were happy until that fateful day. My dad got fired from his work, a big company. He had worked there for 20 years. The only money we had then was what he had managed to save over the years. Finding a new job wasn't easy. It was a hard time for all of us, especially my dad. He was becoming desperate. At times, he just sat there, quietly, deep in thought, and I rarely saw him smile since. One late night, we were still up waiting for him when he walked through the door. But something was different. He wasn't walking straight. It was the first time in my life seeing him drunk. I decided to take matters in my own hand. I started job hunting. I was lucky enough to find something suitable at a startup company. The pay was good enough, and the more I worked, the more I earned. I was trying my best to get our life back. I was giving it all I've got. My dad started asking me for money. I was more than happy to give him what he needed. I didn't even ask what it was for. Then he started asking for more. He came late almost every night, and he was never awake in the morning. It seemed like we hadn't talked together for ages. Then, money started disappearing from my purse. I got home from work one night. It had been a long day, and I was really tired. I put my bag in my room, and I went to the kitchen to find something to eat. I made myself a sandwich, then took it back to my room. But when I got to the door, I saw a shadow moving inside. I thought everyone was asleep, so I opened the door slightly and looked inside. I couldn't believe what I saw. My dad was standing over my bag, and my wallet was in his hand. He found no money in it, so he threw it on the bed and started going through my purse. At that moment, my mom came down the stairs. She had my dad's shirt in her hands and a small pack of white powder. I looked at her face. Her eyes were filled with tears. I tried to speak, but found nothing to say. My dad came out of my room. He saw us standing there. He tore the shirt and the pack from my mom's hands. He was hysterical. He started breaking things around him. Suddenly, everything changed. My mom and I were too scared to move, but then my sister came running down the stairs. He pulled her towards him and held a knife to her throat. He threatened to kill her if we didn't give him money. Without a moment's thought, I did what he asked. Things only got worse. Nothing was ever enough. He asked for more and more money, and if I refused, he'd get violent, beating up anyone in his path. I couldn't stand by and watch, so I would just give him what he wanted, until I decided enough was enough. He barged down the stairs one evening and asked for all the money I've got. I told him we had expenses to pay, the rent, school fees, but none of it mattered to him. He asked me again for the money and threatened me if I didn't do what he asked. I refused. He hit me so hard that I crashed my head against the wall and fell to the floor, bleeding. Everything went dark. My mom took me to different hospitals, and I had to do a lot of checkups and tests, but all the doctors said the same thing, that this was it. I was sentenced to live my life in darkness, never to see the light again. Bumping my head against the wall was one of the reasons, but apparently my psychological state played a huge role in my recovery. The doctors suggested that I'd be taken to a psychiatrist. My dad felt sorry for what he had done to me. He quit the drugs and alcohol, tried to be proper, but it was because of him that I was in this state. I didn't know if I could ever find it in myself to forgive him. I was torn inside. He was my dad, but I couldn't forget what had happened. I stopped talking shortly after, and he left, disappearing from our lives. No one knew where he was or what he was. A year had passed, and he came home. He sounded good, kind of like how he was before. He's trying to make up for what he had done. But to me, nothing he does makes a difference anymore. Kind of like how he was before. He's trying to make up for what he had done. But to me, nothing he does makes a difference anymore. I'm still in the dark. That's something I'm gonna have to live with my whole life. I can't change that. What do you think I should do?
My name is Ricardo. Though I am a 21-year-old, my body is the size of a 10-year-old boy because I was born with a disease called Prader-Willi syndrome, PWS, which stunted my body growth while allowing my mind to continue developing. Most people would consider PWS to be a curse, but it was a gift for Dad and me because we took advantage of this situation. My story starts when Dad's company accused him of embezzlement and fired him. The scandal and shame of this incident kept him from getting any other type of work, so we left our country to start a new life elsewhere. Dad was still unable to get a job because his old company always gave him bad references when called by prospective new employers. Dad was worried about our future, so he improvised and came up with a scheme to turn me into the goose that laid the golden egg. You see, children always bullied me due to my small body size. Luckily, my mature mind helped me avoid fights most of the time. One day, Dad asked me if I wanted to become famous, and I said, sure. He told me that we needed a way to gain people's sympathy, and he explained his plan. We went to the garage and found some old torn clothes that he asked me to wear. Then he poured dirty water on me. Then he made a recording of me crying and explaining that I had been beaten by some bullies in our neighborhood. After we finished making our sympathy-garnering video, he applauded my performance and posted it to the internet to see what reaction we would get. The next day, our video went viral, and I became an instant celebrity. All the news agencies gave the video broad coverage, and I began receiving sympathetic phone calls and donations from around the world. Several international schools offered me free scholarships at their schools, and I managed to amass a good size of money from all the donations, and for a moment, I thought our days of poverty were finally over. Unfortunately, the authorities investigated my background and found that I was 21 years old and not really a kid at all. Then all my fortunes reversed themselves, and the police came after me for fraud. I am speaking to you now from a hotel room as I hide from the police. I have enough money to head to another country, preferably one that has no extradition treaty with my country. I have enough money to live comfortably without needing to work for the rest of my life. So, on balance, I don't have any regrets about what I've done.
Hello, my name is Brenda, and this is how I embarrassed myself when I was about 14 years old. Before I tell you my story, let me highlight a few points. All teens experience some amount of anxiety at times. It is actually a normal reaction to stress, and sometimes it even helps them deal with overwhelming situations. For many teens, things like public speaking, final exams, or even going out on a date can cause feelings of anxiety. For some teens, however, anxiety can go beyond these typical symptoms to negatively affect friendships, participation in activities, and even their schoolwork. And do not get me started on how being a teenager is made of the devil's blood. Okay, that was an innocent joke, but I do mean it. So back to our story, I was sitting in class behind the cutest guy in my grade. His name was Josh, and I just wanted to ask for his phone number. But I was painfully shy and terribly afraid of being rejected. But it was almost time for the school dance. I wanted to go with him, but there was no way on earth I could have done it face to face. I tried to talk myself through the anxiety and convinced myself to actually go through with it. I debated with myself for a while, missing most of that day's in-class instructions before I finally decided to ask him. And I did. I did ask Josh for his number, and he agreed. He slowly took my phone, typed in his number, and handed it back to me. I felt relieved. I had finally gotten the number. I mean, I was wrong. There was nothing to be anxious about. I had made it much worse in my mind than it actually was. It was actually nice to realize I was anxious over nothing, to be over it and have his number. I got home later that day and I was so excited to call or text Josh. But because I'm socially awkward, I decided to try and text him. But the message didn't deliver. I checked the number he gave me and noticed that it included the digits 911, which indicated to me that he had given me a fake number. Maybe he was trying to avoid me. I suddenly became aware of how weird I had acted towards him. I didn't have much of a relationship with the guy before asking for his number. There was no rapport between us, so it came across as creepy when I asked him. I also asked him in the middle of class by tapping him on the shoulder. There was nothing smooth or even normal about how I went about it. I hadn't acted immoral, but it was painfully awkward, socially inappropriate, and thus doomed to fail. The encounter was painful, but from it I suppose I learned some lessons on how to appropriately socialize. I also learned that it is incredibly easy to miss obvious signs that other people are giving you when you're anxious, because you're so absorbed with yourself that you miss social cues. Looking back at how he was clearly uncomfortable with my request, which he made clear by not smiling and by hesitating in agreeing to type the number. Had I gotten out of my head and paid attention, I might have noticed how he was acting and how that clearly reflected how he felt about me and our interaction. It makes me question, is having high-functioning anxiety easier than being trapped in your own shell, frozen with anxiety? It may be the lesser of two evils, but for me this experience turned into purpose, and it built my self-confidence. I see it as a step, but then improving self-esteem and self-worth will have you high-functioning without anxiety. That is the end game. But you know what? Write your own script. You can't go on if someone else is writing your script. And I know that a lot of kids at school felt the same way. they didn't feel good, and I didn't know why. Kids will relate, and this is so freaky, and it makes anxiety even worse. You have to go to know that you are okay in school, and you cannot know unless you go. Getting over anxiety is not some hippie mumbo jumbo, and it took me years to get over what I call life fright. And I learned that the very hard way. Now, does the devil joke make sense?
By the time I was 15 years old, I was taking care of my sick mother, alcoholic father, and my younger brother. I worked at a pizza place, so there would be something for my family to eat. My mom was mentally ill. Her hallucinations were scary. Sometimes she destroyed stuff around the house. My dad was making himself physically ill by drinking too much. He was often late for work, and his eyesight was getting worse. I had to do all the parenting for my 6-year-old brother. I would lie awake at night, and when I finally fell asleep, I had nightmares about my dad dying, or even my brother being taken away. To deal with the stress, I started doing things like my dad in the fall of my freshman year of high school. It made all the muscles in my body relax. I welcomed the numbness, but my father did not make it look good. And so I stopped and tried a different drug instead. One day in the spring of my freshman year, my friend offered me a pill. I hesitated, but then I agreed. 20 minutes later, I felt happy and light, like my body was a cloud. All the stress and worries about my family vanished for hours. After that one pill, I wanted more. My friend knew a dealer, so I would give him the money and he would get me more. Those pills were not cheap, and my paycheck from the pizza place was not enough. I asked my friend, "Do you know anyone who can get me a better job or something?" He said, "Not really. I do have someone that could probably help you out, but that's not exactly a legal job." I knew he was referring to the dealer. I needed money. A few days later, I met Victor, the dealer, in front of his house. He invited me in. His place was dimly lit, but much nicer on the inside than on the outside. Victor told me to take a seat. I tried to act confident, and I told him I was looking to make some money. He nodded. "Since you're a loyal customer, I'll hook you up with something. Have you ever sold before?" he asked. My eyes widened, and my heart skipped a beat, and I said, "No." He nodded and handed me a bag and said, "As a test." He gave me the instructions, and then said, "I don't play around with my money. If I find out you're messing me over in any way, it won't be pretty. Got it?" I nodded and left his house, my heart beating like a drum. I was scared, but excited to start making more money. After I sold my first batch, Victor picked me up at school in his own car. I gave him the money. He looked pleased and offered me some more. Soon, I was bringing Victor money he himself couldn't even make. Now I could buy things for myself. Being high allowed me to take care of my family without feeling overwhelmed or anxious. When I was sober, I couldn't stop worrying about all the things that could happen to my dad, my mom, or even my brother. But after I took a pill, I floated over above my own troubles, and my mind went blank. The pills even helped me escape the nightmares. Soon, I needed a pill every few hours. If I didn't take one, I experienced pain throughout my whole body and severe headaches. In my junior year of high school, some of my childhood friends started to worry about my suspicious attitude. On the outside, I was smiling and reassuring my friends. On the inside, I felt ashamed. Was I really going to be like my dad and destroy myself like that? My parents didn't even notice or care about what I did, even if I popped the pill right in front of them. One day, I blacked out at home. I woke up covered in vomit on my bedroom floor. My mother walked into the room and looked down on me. She didn't say a word. She just walked right out. I expected to be yelled at, not this cold silence. That was my worst moment ever. lying in my own vomit with my mother seeming indifferent. That day, I realized I was on my own. I was the only one who was going to take care of myself, and I had to stop. But the withdrawals were so bad that I could never make it through a day without taking a pill. I called my grandparents in the beginning of my junior year and asked them to come take my little brother to live with them, and they said yes. During that time, I was still getting high a lot, but somehow I was able to make my smartest decision ever. I was proud that I'd gotten my baby brother out of this mess. At the beginning of my senior year, I was still working at the pizza place and still dealing for Victor. My dad was ill, and my mom was disconnected from reality. One night, about a year after my brother left, clarity came as I lay in silence in my room. I was graduating high school next semester, and I had to face the future. My grandparents were old. What would happen to my brother once they're gone? What would happen to me if I kept on popping those pills? Only I could change my life. I knew I was an addict, and the first step to getting sober was admitting that to myself. I thought about all the stupid decisions I'd made. I could have just stayed away. Even now, 3 years later, that shame ticks me sometimes and reminds me that I never want to go back. Then, October of senior year, I took action. I sold my last batch, gave Victor his money, and told him that I'm not gonna sell anymore. He let me go pretty easily. I looked up the symptoms of withdrawal. I knew I'd have to miss school too, because I read that the physical withdrawal lasts a whole week. It was even worse than I read. My body hurt all over, and I felt extremely weak. I trembled and threw up several times a day, to the point where my vomit was just water. I was sweating, but I felt cold. I couldn't afford to go to a real rehab. The whole week I lay in my bed. I had told a few close friends I was quitting, and I had called them to report how I was doing. They told me that they were proud of me and would always be there for me. I realized that I didn't have to face my own demons alone. My mom continued to talk to herself in the living room, while my dad did what he always does, but I had friends to support me in my time of need. I missed almost a whole month of school, and my GPA fell a lot. In fact, that quarter, I failed 2 classes because of my absence. I knew if people knew my real situation, I might go into foster care. At that point, I didn't want to be separated from my parents, so I told my teachers that I was dealing with some family stuff. Some teachers had heard rumors that I was dealing pills. My English teacher said, "I'm proud that you decided to change for the better. You're a smart kid, and I hope you stay on the right path." Her response almost brought tears to my eyes. I'd never heard anyone, not even my own parents, tell me they were proud of me. Once I returned to school, I did all of my homework, never missed another class, and did extremely well on all of the exams. I even got into college. I was finally on the right track. But life didn't get that much easier once I was sober. Starting college was overwhelming because I wasn't used to that amount of work professors assigned. It was hard to stay clean through the doubts. I believed I wasn't good enough for college, and that if I screwed up even a little bit, I'd go back to square one. Instead of numbing myself, I faced the demons and released them. It's way better than feeling nothing at all.
I don't really like Indian movies because the actors are always overreacting, and the movies are not logical at all. But this is just my personal opinion. However, I've discovered that there are stories stranger than Indian movies. Let me give you a real life example. I'll tell you a story about a young woman named Samantha. Samantha was a beautiful girl with blonde hair and green eyes. She lived with her grandmother after her parents died in a horrible car accident. The whole country read about it. She had many friends, and all the neighbors liked her. They considered her the most beautiful girl in town. Many had proposed to her, but she didn't care much for them. One day, Samantha was walking alone down the street after visiting one of her friends. Suddenly, she had an eerie feeling that someone was following her. She began running and crying for help. Her follower began running and stopped her. He was an ugly man, pointing a knife in her direction. He asked her to hand over her purse. She threw it at him and made a run for it. The man said wait and made to stop her, but another man appeared out of nowhere and punched the thief, who fell unconscious. The brave and good Samaritan picked up Samantha's purse and handed it to her. He was very handsome, with green eyes, soft hair, and an amazing smile. He escorted her back home, and she felt that he was her knight in shining armor. She went inside and hugged her grandmother tight, who was a little surprised but smiled. Samantha was so happy that she gently pulled her grandmother to her feet, and they whirled around and danced playfully. The very next day, she was surprised when she answered the doorbell. Steve, the tall, handsome man, was standing there, holding flowers. He proposed to her, and she said yes. Thus began their love story. Then one day, Samantha was standing in the kitchen preparing dinner. Steve and her grandmother were out, but they were supposed to be back soon. Samantha had everything ready, and she set the table. The house door opened, and Steve walked in. Samantha went to greet him, but she felt dizzy and fainted. Steve quickly took her to the hospital. The doctor congratulated Steve, saying that he was going to be a father. Steve was ecstatic, but Samantha was not. Instead, she was shocked and nervous. She said that she was too young to have kids, that she wasn't ready to be a mother. Steve was taken aback and said, "But why? Don't you want him?" Things were different from that point on. Samantha tried to get an abortion several times, but Steve was always stopping her. She couldn't accept it. She blamed Steve, but Steve couldn't understand her. In her 7th month of pregnancy, Samantha was with her grandmother at the supermarket when she saw a small boy run onto the road. Fearing he might get run over by a car, Samantha quickly pulled the boy off the road to safety. The boy's mother saw what happened and thanked Samantha, feeling so grateful and relieved. Samantha was crying at the moment and replied, "No need to thank me. I'm going to be a mother like you soon." For the first time, she was beginning to feel real affection for the baby. "Forgive me," she silently thought to herself. She tried to contact Steve many times to tell him that she had finally accepted. She was ready to become a mother, but he never responded. Finally, the day had come. Samantha went to the hospital to give birth. After the surgery, she was very tired. Nevertheless, when she woke up, she immediately asked for the baby. Her grandmother handed her the child. It was a daughter, and she was so beautiful. The nurse tried to take the baby out of her arms, but Samantha refused, wanting to hold her for as long as she could. The next day, Samantha heard a big commotion, and she had a feeling of dread that something bad had just happened. It was confirmed when she saw her grandmother's face. She asked what had happened, and her grandmother told her that a child was missing and had apparently been kidnapped. Samantha's pale face slowly pleaded, "Please don't tell me that it was my daughter." When her grandmother nodded, Samantha broke down and began crying and wailing in pain. The nurses tried to calm her down, and when she did, her grandmother came over to her and handed her a note. It had been found in her missing daughter's hospital crib. It was in Steve's handwriting. It simply said, "If you don't want her, I do." Then Samantha fainted. For many years, she tried finding her baby, but couldn't. Steve and her daughter had vanished into thin air. She felt as if time had stopped for her, but Steve didn't feel that way. He raised their daughter into a beautiful young woman. He named her Margot. Whenever Margot asked about her mother, Steve would always tell her that her mother was dead, but he often told her stories about her mother and how much he had loved her. Margot's intuition, however, told her that her father wasn't being completely honest with her and that he was hiding some big dark secret. One day, Steve fell ill unexpectedly. He called Margot to him and told her that he was very sick and felt that he was going to die soon. He said that he wanted to reveal a secret that he had long kept from her, that her mother was actually alive, and that her name was Samantha. He told her that he had kidnapped her from the hospital at birth because her mother did not want a child. He regretted it and asked Margot to forgive him. He gave her Samantha's address, and soon after, he died. After his death, Margot decided to go looking for her mother. I am Margot, and I am now standing at my mother's address, at her front door. I cannot predict my mother's reaction when she answers the door and I introduce myself as her daughter, but I'm going to hug her and tell her that I've missed her for so long.
Surrounded by many of her friends and neighbors, I leaned in close to her and whispered, "Hi, Mom. This is Carlos. I came to see how you were doing. Drug dealing, weapons dealing, kidnapping, theft, you name it, and I've done it. I am not particularly proud of this lifestyle, but hey, it's a living. My twin brother, Virgil, on the other hand, chose the other side of the law. He was a police officer, and he always worked the night shift. I tried many times to get him to come over to the dark side, so to speak. I told him he could make his whole year's salary in a matter of hours, but he always refused. He would say that he couldn't take blood money. Mom agreed with his honest, legitimate lifestyle, so I eventually left home to do my own thing. I lost track of Mom and Virgil for years, until a friend informed me one day that my brother had been arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison. This incredible event had happened just a few hours after our most recent burglary. My friend also told me that the news said that my mom was terribly ill. It turned out that Virgil had been arrested trying to steal some expensive medicine to save her life. I became livid. I rushed to Mom's house to find her on her deathbed, surrounded by many of her friends and neighbors. I leaned in close to her and whispered, "Hi, Mom. This is Carlos. I came to see how you were doing." She opened her eyes and smiled, but she looked so sad and wistful. She said, "Please, try to see your brother one last time before he goes to prison." I asked her to forgive me and promised her that I would do so. Then I concocted a crazy plan. I dressed as a policeman, forged a visitation permit, and tricked the police station holding my brother into letting me visit him in an interrogation room. While I was questioning Virgil under the watchful eye of officers on the other side of the interrogation room's one-way mirror, I surreptitiously dialed a number on my cell phone and whispered into it, "Go." At that moment, the power and lights went out throughout the police station. I explained my plan and rationale to my brother and persuaded him to change clothes with me. Virgil left in my stead and once again lived as a free man on the outside while I went to prison in his place. I did this to put myself right in my mom's eyes. I think she'd be proud of me. Virgil, I'll see you in 10 years, brother.
Hey, my name is Rachel. In high school, the homecoming dance was coming up. I happened to confide that I had a crush on a popular guy to another girl in my class. Unbeknownst to me, they were very, very good friends, and this girl offered to put in a good word for me. The next day, she told me my crush would totally say yes if I asked him. So, in between periods, I found my crush in the hallway, asked him to the homecoming dance, and he said yes. Well, homecoming is on Saturday. Today is Thursday. My crush, his friend, and we went to lunch together and I offered to pay in the hopes that this will make them like me even more. And yes, I was that bad. They tell me they want 2 bags of chips, burgers, fries, and 2 small cartons of chocolate milk. No problem. I go to the cafeteria and get those items like a boss. For some reason, I decided to jog over to them, even though that really only shaves off 10 minutes from my trip, but I still did it. I had 2 bags of chips in my mouth, one in my hand with a burger and fries, the other hand with 2 cartons of chocolate milk. They are sitting in the common area. The common area is carpeted, parallel to the cafeteria which had a tile floor. These rooms are separated by a relatively small metal line on the floor, and as I meet that line, my left foot catches on the metal. No problem, I have another foot. I will just swing that foot forward real quick and save this. But no, the other foot also catches. As I fall straight forward, I try to catch myself with my hands. Well, one hand had the chocolate milk in it, which just burst out, sending chocolate milk in every single direction. My other hand didn't help me either. It slipped on the burger in the bag and the fries go all over the place. The last thing to break my fall was actually my own face. The face with two bags of potato chips in my mouth. You know those jokes about chips bags being full of air? Well, they're actually true. As my face collided with the ground, both the bags of chips exploded at the same exact time and it sounded like a gunshot. Somehow one of my shoes just flew off. I tried to melt into the ground and fade out of existence for a moment, and this happened at the meeting point of the common room and the cafeteria. So everyone in both rooms either saw or heard this fiasco and looked over. About 100 students. It's deadly silent for a couple of seconds and then comes the laughter. And dear God, the laughter. It was like a jet engine. Every person there was laughing the hardest they have ever laughed in their whole lives. I even saw the janitor doubled over laughing, bracing himself with a mop handle. A teacher was trying to walk over to help me, but she stopped every couple of feet to use her whole body to laugh at me. All of this happens not 10 feet away from the table in which my crush and his friends were sitting. Everyone is having a great laugh, but my crush has the greatest laugh of all. He has fallen to the ground, with one hand bracing himself on his knees. The other hand is clutched at his ribs as he laughs so hard that no sound comes out. He was wheezing like a dolphin. There is no recovery from this. I walked to the bathroom to clean myself up. The teacher could only manage to hand me my shoe along the way and continue laughing. In the bathroom, the laughter did not die at all for what seemed like a lifetime. When the bell rang, I was still in the bathroom and people were still laughing. While I spent the whole day wallowing in easily the most embarrassing moment of my life, I thought, well, maybe I'm just a funny girl and he will like it. The next morning, I see my crush before class and he walks up to me and he says, "So homecoming is tomorrow." Eager not to speak about the shit show that happened yesterday, I just excitedly said, "Yes, yes it is." And then he delivers a crisp and says, so this girl that I actually like asked me to go to the dance with her, so I think I'm gonna go." To which I replied, yeah, that makes sense. I totally did not go in the bathroom and cry after that. Anyways, my crush said he will go to homecoming with me. The day before, I tripped with his lunch and face planted into a pool of random ingredients in front of the entire class. My crush did not go to the homecoming dance with me.
Before this summer, I had zero experience with dating apps. Tinder wasn't even released until 2 years after my long-term relationship ended. During 7 years of my relationship, I had played around on my friends' apps, but never swiped left or right. Finding myself suddenly single at the beginning of the summer and in desperate need of distraction, I dove headfirst into the pool of online dating. I started with Tinder because my town is too small for anything else, and my cold dead heart wanted casual dates and nothing serious. And that's the whole purpose of Tinder. Tinder met most of my expectations. I went on a handful of dates, met some cool guys, and some not so cool guys. I even hung out with a few truly interesting people, like a radio DJ who runs a wedding business on the side. What I did not expect from Tinder, however, was how most of these interactions started to make me feel good about myself. I mean, really good about myself. Like every woman in the world, I have never been happy with my body. At a size 10, I am labeled plus size, and I've worn glasses on and off throughout my whole life. When I'm out with my girlfriends, I am never the girl who is hit on, flirted with, or even picked up. Ever since I hit puberty and became aware of attractive versus unattractive, I've thought of myself as filling the role of the fat friend who just sits back and smiles. Obviously, I've had boyfriends, but they've always been my friends first. So when they said you're gorgeous, what I heard was, I found you gorgeous only after getting to know you. I didn't immediately think you were pretty. I know that having someone attracted to your personality is way more important than thinking you're cute. But I wouldn't hate having just one guy who doesn't know me at all tell me that I'm attractive. Friends, family, and boyfriends, I don't believe. But a total stranger, that person I might actually listen to. This brings us back to Tinder. One of my first nights using the app, a friend and I sat on my back deck and decided who to swipe left and right on. With each it's a match, we laughed and looked into the guy's profile a bit more. After the third match, I said, these guys are just judging me on my appearance, right? And my friend nodded. So they're only swiping because they think I'm cute? Or are they just swiping on every girl? We concluded that obviously some of the guys were swiping right on every girl, but the chances of every single guy doing that were slim. We swiped some more. When I started matching with guys who were classically good looking, well, I won't lie, that felt really good. A hot guy actually thinks that I'm attractive? What? No. How could that be? Then the messages started. Some guys went right in with, you're really pretty. Others went in for a conversation first before giving out compliments here and there. I know that this is how people operate on Tinder, but keep in mind that I'm not used to anything. It wasn't until I started meeting with these guys that I wondered, can Tinder actually boost my self-esteem? Two guys asked how someone as pretty as me was still single. I went on a date with one guy who told me in Spanish that I was beautiful. Another guy who I'd met up with a few times asked me, are you looking for something serious? I laughed like a loon in response. It wasn't the question that surprised me. It was the fact that I was coming from an incredibly attractive, incredibly fit guy. Because yes, I'm being shallow and only swiping right on guys who I find physically attractive. When I was done laughing, I said something awkward like, oh, maybe? I mean, I'm not against it. My mind, however, was saying, are you serious? Have you seen yourself? Have you seen me? I was in fact not attractive, but I simply knew how to dress well. I retreated into my unhealthy shell. Soon after that guy, I hung out with a sweet, nerdy medical student who was in town on a vacation. We got along well. The next day, as we met up again, he seemed shocked that I was on a second date. He kept repeating, you're just so beautiful. I never get to do things like this. I don't know how to respond to compliments. And the medical boy shook his head. He said, don't do that. Don't body shame yourself. You're so attractive. Have you seen yourself? You're gorgeous. Something about that guy made my typical self-hate thoughts start to lose hold. Again, I know that this is the type of stuff people say on Tinder, but let's be honest, why put in the extra effort? Unless it's true. Somewhere between the casual Tinder chats, the handful of dates, my mind circled a new thought. Am I attractive? I stared at myself in my full-length mirror. I tried to see what these guys saw. Guys who did not know me at all. Guys who are not being swayed by my personality. And guys who have no reason to compliment me because I'm not looking for another relationship anytime soon. Suddenly I started to see it. Where I used to see unsightly lumps and a stomach I sucked in before turning off the lights, now I see a healthy, curvy, and dare I say it, slender body. Friends, family, and boyfriends have always told me that I'm attractive, but it wasn't until these strangers started repeating it over and over that I actually started to hear it. So which is boosting my self-esteem? Tinder or just plain dating? Or are they working in with one another because without Tinder, I probably wouldn't be dating at all? Romantically, I tend not to put myself out there. I typically wouldn't approach a guy and try flirting with him, for fear of rejection, of course. With Tinder, however, just matching with someone seems to lessen the fear of rejection. Whether you matched with them because they're genuinely interested, or you matched because they're saying yes to everyone, seeing that it's a match message eases a tiny bit of the tension that goes into dating. Whether it's thanks to Tinder or not, in the past few months I've discovered newfound confidence. When someone compliments me, I say thank you instead of responding with a self-hatred joke. When I meet a date for the first time, I work at being my usual chatty, sarcastic self rather than being shy and quiet. I have flirted with guys and even gave a random musician my number. For once in my life, I feel like I'm someone worth dating, rather than fearing my significant other might be too good for me. Did Tinder give me this confidence boost? Or am I just getting older and wiser? I don't know for sure. But what I do know is that I'm not going to stop online dating anytime soon.
In people's lives, there are unbelievable coincidences that no one could imagine happening. During those times, you have to ask yourself, is this real or is it a joke? Here is such a story. I am John, and I am 15 years old. I live with my parents and my sister Rona. I'm immensely popular at school and have lots of friends, and I'm the captain of our school football team. I also used to play guitar in a small band consisting of me and my friends. We would hold concerts at clubs and our friends' homes. My only flaw is that I like making fun of people. I just can't stay quiet when I see something conspicuous, obtrusive, or ostentatious. My teasing sometimes hurts people, but honestly, I never worry much about hurting people's feelings. Little did I know that a day of reckoning was coming. One day, my parents were traveling to visit my aunt to see her new baby, and I was returning from camping out with my friends. When I got home, I found a note from Mom asking me to buy some items from the store, so I went to the supermarket. The supermarket owner was a kind gentleman named Henry. When I entered, I didn't see him, so I called out to him. A strange voice answered from somewhere. It told me to do my shopping, and he/she would be out in a moment. I had just begun gathering the needed items in a shopping cart when I was surprised by a voice behind me that asked, "How may I help you, sir?" I looked around to see a short man around the age of 40. He looked a little like Gollum in the Lord of the Rings movie. I laughed out loud. He smiled at me but had no idea why I was laughing. I told him that he looked like Gollum from the movie, and he asked me if I had a problem with that. I told him that it was his problem, not mine. I asked him if he ate like a human or if he ate raw fish like Gollum. I asked him to ring up my items before I died laughing. He looked a little annoyed by my teasing, belittling behavior. As I was leaving, I tossed him an apple and told him that, living in a cave for such a long time, he needed to eat some fruit to stay healthy. Then I laughed again. Once I got home, I called my friends and told them about Gollum, and invited them to visit me the next day. They brought over a few raw fish, and we went to the supermarket and threw the fish on the floor. One of my friends said, "Oh dear, I've dropped my fish." Then we ran out of the store. Mr. Gollum came out and cleaned up the floor with a look of annoyance. We repeated this prank several times. Sometimes we would throw rotten fruits, and sometimes one of us would rush in and make a mess and then run away. His reactions made us roll on the floor laughing. It was great entertainment. On our way to school on our first day of the new school semester, we stopped by the supermarket to tease Gollum some more, but he was nowhere to be found, so we proceeded to school. At school, we learned that we would have a new teacher who was reportedly very tough. When the principal came in with the new teacher to introduce him, we were shocked to find out our new teacher was none other than Gollum, or Mr. Travis, as the principal called him. He said hello to the class and asked everyone to sit down except for my friends and me. He told us that our first lesson would be about housekeeping, and that my friends and I would be cleaning the classrooms, the schoolyards, and the toilets, but only after class was over. My friends and I had to remain standing during the whole class. Mr. Travis came over to me and whispered in my ear that he was going to teach me and my friends some manners. It was the most difficult school period of my life. My friends and I learned a valuable lesson. Don't make fun of someone because he may be your boss someday. I must leave you now because I have to clean the restrooms.
I am addicted to food. I suffer a lot. I need help. I've tried to give up, but I fail every time. Hamburgers. Who can give up eating hamburgers, especially with barbecue sauce? I didn't mind this kind of addiction, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me begin by introducing myself. I am Patricia, 15 years old, living with my parents and my brother. I lead a quiet life. No interests, no hobbies, except for eating, that is. Food is my faithful friend. It never leaves me. It is my partner, my soulmate. But having food as your soulmate has insidious side effects. A dark side, if you will. It denies me a healthy life, robs me of the energy to play, and causes me to sleep excessively. I would much rather stay at home with a bag of potato chips than go out and exercise. My soulmate ultimately betrayed me, though, last Thanksgiving at my granny's home. She lives in a state nearby. Granny was a clever doctor, and an excellent cook at that. She could conjure up something really delicious. On that day, she had prepared barbecue turkey with nuts and other secret recipe ingredients. The taste was so great, as if it had descended from heaven itself. I felt like I was fighting a food war, and I had to win at all costs. I ate and ate and ate. I don't know why, but I just couldn't control myself. I attacked that turkey like it was the last on the planet. But every culinary war with a worthy adversary, such as the barbecued turkey, has its own unique type of casualties. Suddenly, I found myself unable to breathe. I fell to my knees and passed out. The turkey had won. I woke up later in the hospital, though, still clinging to an unfinished turkey leg. The doctor told me that I was gaining way too much weight. He said that I should be put on a diet. Diet? Man, how I hated that word. It hung over my head like the sword of Damocles. It meant depriving me of my passion, my reason for living. I considered eating vegetables in small amounts to be the worst form of cruel and unusual punishment, the worst form of torture imaginable. Imagine thinking of a wonderful, greasy, cheese-laden pizza with all the toppings, and then suddenly opening your eyes to find a healthy green salad bowl. But I had reached a turning point in life. One day, my brother was playing on the street, while I was sitting at home gazing longingly at a tempting piece of cheesecake, just sitting there, taunting, daring me to eat it. I struggled mightily to resist the urge, but in the end I succumbed and wolfed it down like a starving animal. Shortly afterwards, I began feeling dizzy, but I was unable to call for help this time, and then I passed out again. I was taken to the hospital. While lying in the hospital bed, half conscious, I overheard the doctor say to someone, "She needs to stop eating or it will be the death of her." I thought to myself, whoa, death? So I made up my mind right then, right there. I resolved to fight a new war, a war against my appetite. On our way back home, I told my father that I wanted to see a nutritionist. He was delighted to hear that. Later, at the clinic, the doctor welcomed us in. She told me how to overcome my eating fetish. She gave me a strict diet regimen with a schedule full of healthy meals. I kept telling myself that winning this war was possible. I simply had to be patient and persevere. I stuck to the strict diet and did some physical workouts. My parents supported me wholeheartedly. I was enthusiastic. I can totally do this. A week passed quickly, and I eagerly visited the doctor to receive some good news. When the doctor weighed me and told me that my weight hadn't changed at all, I was crestfallen. She looked at me and asked me, how was this possible? I told her I didn't know, because I was following her diet thoroughly, though it did require a tremendous effort on my part. Another week passed, and again I went to the doctor. The results were the same. She said to me, "Patricia, are you sure you're following the diet I prescribed for you?" I said yes. She sat there wondering. Then she told me with a puzzled look on her face, "It's odd, but your weight is increasing, not decreasing." This unexpected piece of news mystified me. Another week passed. No change. The doctor was nonplussed. I returned home with a dejected look on my face. My father asked me what was wrong. And when I told him, he laughed. "Do you believe that? My father actually laughed at my predicament. I was furious. He gestured an apology with his hand and then told me that it was my own fault. I was puzzled. What are you talking about? He told me that I had been sleepwalking to the refrigerator every night and eating everything in sight. I was taken aback. I couldn't believe it. Stop acting like he didn't know it, he said. You must have been awake. I replied, No, father, I'm not acting. I was truly unaware that I've been sleepwalking and eating in my sleep. But now that we've finally solved the mystery of the increasing weight, we returned to the doctor with this new information and told her the situation. She laughed and told me that my discipline had denied my body the food it craved, but my brain had refused to cooperate and had overridden my will by urging me to eat in a subconscious state. She told me not to worry, though, that she could treat that. Armed with this knowledge and her support, and the support of my family, I felt that I could finally win this war.
I'm a musician. Not a terribly great one, but still, I consider myself a musician. I know my way around an instrument or two. More importantly, I'm a collector. I love collecting things, starting from coins to lottery tickets. There's no rhyme or reason to my collection. It consists of anything uniquely interesting I can get my hands on. That is why when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a vintage, rustic, red piano, I could not help but reach out to the seller. The ad's title seemed normal enough. It said, Old Piano, Read a Good Home. It was nothing out of the ordinary, and not something that would normally grab my attention. Still, I felt a strange need to click on it. Perhaps I was bored, or maybe I just wanted to see what it looked like. Either way, I gave in to the temptation. There was no picture, just a story. It read something like this: I'm offering my piano to anyone who is willing to come and pick it up. It is very old, but still playable. I can prove this upon your arrival. It is red and has no brand markings. This is because it was made by my great-grandfather. It is one of a kind. He went out himself and chopped down a redwood tree to provide the material to build it. It took him many days to finally cut down the tree and much, much longer to finish making the piano. Nearly his entire life was put into this thing. I, however, have no use for it. It has been passed down in my family many times over. I have no wish to continue the tradition, and the piano is currently taking too much space in my home. I want it gone as quickly as possible. You can reach me by phone at the number listed below. Margaret. Reading the ad sparked my curiosity. One of a kind? Redwood tree? How strange and absurd! I had to see this thing. If it was half as remarkable as Margaret's description, then it was a must-have for my ever-growing collection. As such, I decided to give her a call. Margaret answered the phone after the first ring and immediately asked, Is this about the piano? She was thrilled to hear I was interested. I too was thrilled, happy to know it was still available. We set up a time the next day for me to come over and take a look at it. I hung up the phone, excited as I could be. I had a feeling this piano would become the new masterpiece of my collection. Being a musician, I own countless instruments, too many to list. Each time I acquired a new item, my heart would race with excitement. The piano was no different. I couldn't wait to see it in person. I woke up the following day with no resistance to my alarm, starting my daily routine in an effort to minimize the time between me and Margaret. She said she was an early bird and that I could swing by early. With that in mind, I showered, brushed my teeth, and got dressed at a record pace. I made it out the door roughly 25 minutes after getting out of bed. It might sound silly to be so worked up over a material object, but to that I'd say, You must not be a collector. Seeing this piano in person was my mission, and it was one I intended to see through the end. I found myself at Margaret's home within an hour. It was a small cottage at a dead end road, surrounded by a forest. There was an old tire swing in the backyard, indicating that it may have been where Margaret grew up. I wonder if her parents passed away and left her the house. Maybe the piano reminded her of them, and that was the real reason why she was getting rid of it. My speculation was interrupted by a woman racing out of the cottage to greet me. She signaled for me to come inside and went back in herself. This was with no doubt Margaret. I hadn't introduced myself in any way, but it wasn't likely that she received many visitors, and that's most likely because of where she lives. Eager to see the piano, I quickly jumped out of my car and made my way up to the stone walkway to the front door. Entering the house, Margaret seemed overjoyed to see me. It was overwhelming, but made things a little less awkward. She rushed me over to the room with the piano. She was so excited to show it to me, just as I was excited to see it. I matched her pace as we made our way up there. Upon entering, I stopped dead in my tracks. It was a beautiful concoction of wood and ivory, the likes of which I've never seen before. It had such a striking red color with a bold finish, and the design was mind-blowing. Simple, yet elegant. Highly original, and certainly one of a kind like Margaret stated in her ad. I stood there for a moment. Margaret mistook my reaction for disinterest, quickly going off on a sales pitch about its charm and history and so on. She then sat down at its stool and placed her hands over the keys. I tuned it yesterday after your call. Let's hear how it sounds. Margaret played a beautiful piece. In addition to playing, she also sang. This is when I took my attention away from the piano and allowed myself to notice her. She was young, maybe in her 20s. Her singing voice, accompanied by the wonderfully rich tone of the piano, has totally captivated me in a way that I can't put into words. I allowed myself to be taken by the song until she finished. Before I could compliment her, Margaret continued her well-rehearsed sales pitch. I don't know if it was her playing or her voice, but I was sold the minute she touched the keys. Because of this, I interrupted her. I'll take it. She was astounded when I said this. Really? You will? Wonderful. We were both happy and everything seemed fine, but one fact kept creeping and crawling at the back of my mind. The history of each piece in my collection is very important to me, and the piano had gaps that needed to be filled. So, have you lived in this house your whole life? I asked, secretly fishing for information. Yes, as did my parents. This house is very old, older than the piano. And your great-grandfather, he lived here as well? I asked. Yes, he did. Well, redwoods don't grow everywhere, and they're truly massive. It seems unlikely that he would have made the trek out there or even have been able to chop one down, especially with the many trees here at his disposal. It was at this point that Margaret realized I had caught her in a lie. She apologized to me, and she came clean. It would seem that the piano was made from a red tree, just not redwood. Instead, it was a strange tree located deep in a nearby forest. Being a historian, Margaret's great grandfather knew all about it. This particular tree was a local legend, and it had always been his dream to find it. It was known as the blood tree, a sacred place. Anyone who touched it was said to live a long life filled with luck. Those who wounded it, however, would forever know fear and misfortune. Her great-grandfather, of course, fell into the latter category. Though she claimed not to believe in the legend, she was worried the curse would scare off anyone who wanted it. Dark past or not, I still wanted it. Despite Margaret's deception, I attempted to offer her money. She wouldn't have it, insisting I just take the thing off her hands. That would have been fine, but I couldn't bring myself to offer nothing in return. Eventually, I convinced her and handed over an envelope with a decent amount of money in it. She accepted and helped me lift the thing into the back of my truck. I waved and drove off, satisfied with my purchase. Later on, with the help of a friend, I positioned it in the perfect spot in my living room. I had a new piece for the collection and I couldn't be happier, or so I thought. For a few days, my life continued as it normally did. My routine remained unchanged. The only difference was the new piece that grabbed my attention whenever I entered the room. After a while, I barely noticed it was there. Despite its beauty, it soon blended in with the rest of my home, much like the other items in my collection. One night, however, changed everything. I had just gone to bed when a loud bang downstairs jolted and freaked me out. I jumped out of bed and took a moment to breathe. The sound was unmistakably the piano's fallboard slamming shut over the keys. That could easily happen on its own had I left it open, and that was not the case. I hadn't played the piano once since I bought it. So what created the sound? I raced downstairs in hope to put my mind at ease. What I found was horrifying. The piano's fallboard was up. Not only had it not shut over the keys, but it was open despite my never touching it. Confusion swam through my brain, but soon submitted to the clutches of late-night tiredness. To make sense of things, I shut the fallboard and went back to bed. Nothing to worry about. The next day was pretty normal. At first, I woke up early, took a shower, brushed my teeth, and started my commute. I worked and dealt with the stress that came along with it, just as I always did. The piano was the farthest thing from my mind. It wasn't until I got home that it crept its way back in. Upon opening the door to my house, I was greeted with a cold gust that rushed out from within. I hadn't left the AC on, so that was strange. I walked into the living room and put my jacket on the couch. I then looked up and noticed the piano. The fallboard, it was up. That could not be true. I shut it the night before. Had someone break in? I ran around my house with a kitchen knife in my hand, ready to attack. There was no one. After checking every inch of my house, I eventually found myself back in the living room in front of the piano. The fallboard was now down. Was I going mad? No, of course not. This was just the byproduct of an exhausted, overworked mind, nothing more. At least, that's what I told myself to keep from dwelling on it. Still somewhat freaked out, I went to my bedroom for some quality sleep. A good end to a bad day. This time, you get to know the truth about the haunted piano. I left. I went to work. Then I came home and went to bed. Everything was back to normal, just as I told myself it was. Music started playing again. That's when it hit me. This was not paranormal. It couldn't be. It was a cheap trick. Margaret must have programmed the piano to play itself. It was just a prank. A laugh at my expense. That's why the damn thing was free. I ran downstairs to solve the mystery once and for all. Like clockwork, as soon as my foot touched the bottom step, the piano stopped playing. I walked over to it, confident in my new theory. Upon opening it up and exploring all of it, I was surprised by what I saw. It was just a normal piano. Nothing extra was added in its creation to make it play on its own. My calmness was not calm anymore. I stared at the red wood and ivory keys before me and almost felt compelled to ask, "What are you?" Instead, I remained silent. This silence, however, was quickly interrupted by the sound of music as the piano began playing itself once again. I wanted to run, but fear kept me still. I watched the horror unfold. The keys were being pressed down hard, controlled by an unseen force. A haunting peace filled the room as pictures fell from the walls. The house began to shake around me. My eyes darted back and forth in fear. But then I noticed something outside. Standing at my window was a shadowy figure. I ran outside to escape the madness. All the while the song went on. The house continued to shake behind me. The dark figure was nowhere to be seen. Margaret has not rigged the piano to play on its own, but I was not losing my marbles either. This was something entirely different, something out of this world. All at once, the music stopped playing, and the world around me with it. No wind, no cars, no animals, and no people. Nothing. It was the middle of the night at this point, but where were the crickets, the frogs, or even the trees? Where was life outside my home? A little exploration revealed that I was truly by myself. Every living creature in the world had disappeared. What the hell was going on? Why was this happening? I returned home, hoping for answers, but instead, I saw an unsettling sight. It was so dark, I almost didn't see it. Standing completely still next to the piano was the same silhouette from my window. My body was shaking with fear, but the figure did not react. It was frozen like the rest of the world. The shadow was wearing a dark cloak, one that covered its entire body. At its face was nothing but pure darkness. I studied the figure for a few more moments before a familiar sound filled the room. The piano song played, and in an instant, the world returned to life. I fell to the ground, but managed to escape, crawling out the front door and rushing over to my car. I got in and took off with no specific location in mind, happy to be anywhere that was not my own home. I started weighing my options. Destroying the piano came to mind, but the risk outweighed the reward. It could just as easily backfire, angering whatever spirit was hunting its keys. Seeking help wasn't really an option either. The only person who might believe me was Margaret. That was it. Margaret. Maybe she would know what to do. It was late, but I didn't care. I drove over to her place. The dark figure was there, standing at her door. Before I could turn in the opposite direction, it grabbed me by the arm with its bony fingers. Its strength kept me anchored in place, and then it disappeared. I had no choice but to return home. I hesitantly stepped past the piano and walked up to my bedroom, where I locked the door and fell into bed, mentally exhausted. I would not have even a moment of peace, as the song started up again the second my head hit the pillow. But I remained still, sick of the repetition. The banging on my bedroom door that followed, however, succeeded in freaking me out. I jumped out of bed and pushed my dresser to the door, and I hid under my sheet. The banging persisted, but I chose to instead focus on the song, allowing myself to properly listen to it for the first time. Surprisingly enough, it was beautiful. Dark, but beautiful. Its melody soothed me, relaxing me to the point that my eyes grew tired. I fell asleep and I had a dream. The dream world I found myself in was different. It was overwhelmingly vivid and real. Words like surreal and otherworldly just don't cut it. The awareness I had is also difficult to explain. I was completely aware of my surroundings in the sense that I could feel everything about them. I know that doesn't make much sense, but it's the only description I have to offer. The dream was in a forest. It was large, and at its center, a large red tree stood tall. Every fiber of my being knew where I was. This was the blood tree, the precursor to my piano. As I admired the beauty of the blood tree, a person stepped out from behind. He did not speak. He simply pointed at the tree. This is when the piano leaked into my dream. The song played as glowing lines ran up and down the tree's bark. The man put his hand to the wood, motioning for me to do the same. And I did. It was an incredible sensation. My eyes were filled with visions, a glimpse into the blood tree's past. Its bark wasn't always red. Native habitats came up to the tree every year. They would slice their hands open and place them on the tree's trunk. Their blood then dripped to its base, representing the lifelines of their people. It also signified becoming one with nature, feeding the tree life from within. It was the anchor that kept their community together. This is where they gathered and enjoyed life. A place free from worry, a safe place. This was also where the natives buried their dead. After that, one of the elders would play a song. The same song my piano played every night. It was their song of death. When it was all over, a final offering of blood was taken from the fallen and painted on the blood tree, granting their spirits safe passage to the afterlife. When the vision stopped, my new friend released his hand from the bark and pulled out an unusual instrument. He began playing the song of death, but then stopped. He handed it to me and motioned for me to play instead. I wasn't sure what he was up to, but felt no need to deny his wishes. With little practice, I was able to get the hang of the instrument and play the song. As I played, the blood tree began wilting, its bark changing from red to black. My friend was ecstatic. For one reason or another, this is what he wanted. It wasn't until I woke up later in bed that the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Margaret's grandfather had taken away the natives' headstone. He violated their connection to nature as well as with one another. The tree and its spirits had to be put to rest, and once and for all, there was only one way to do this. I can't explain how, but I knew I needed to play the Song of Death on the piano, the whole way through without interruption. It was the only thing that would break the curse. I ran downstairs and put my plan into action. When my hands touched the keys, the house violently shook, knocking frames and furniture all over the place. I kept my composure. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the dark figure standing at my window again. Still, I continued. I had an obligation to preserve, if not for the tree or its ghosts, then for myself. The nightmare had to end. They roamed around the room, sometimes next to me, other times breathing down my neck. I paid no attention on the outside, but my bones were shaking. I had come too far to lose my balance now. Just as the shadowy figure sat next to me at the piano, I struck the final note of the song. The madness around me stopped. I turned to the figure beside me, and it was the native from my dream. He threw me a thankful smile before vanishing. My work was done. Months have passed, and the piano remains in my living room, quieter than it's ever been before. I even play it from time to time. If there's one thing you can take away from my experience, it's to be mindful of the things that make sounds at night. Try your best not to be frightened, and please let this tale be a warning to you. Don't ever buy strange things from Craigslist. You'll thank me later.
Everyone likes mysterious phenomena. People are attracted to inexplicable things that mystify the mind, pique our curiosity, and provoke our imagination. People hate secrets and yearn to know how things work and why. When watching TV with your friends, figuring out murder mysteries and horror movies is relatively easy. But in real life, sometimes this is not so easy. Instead of anticipation of learning the truth about a mystery, you may be terrified instead. No, I'm not pitching for a new movie debut. I am introducing my story, which deals with a life experience involving this very topic. My name is Henrique, and I am 23 years old. I live with my father in a neighborhood that is quieter than most. Its residents go to sleep soon after sunset. Are you intrigued by this neighborhood? A legend circulates around this neighborhood that, well, first let me tell you how we came to live in this nice, quiet neighborhood. We used to live across town, but our old house burned down. Mom died in the fire, but Dad and I miraculously survived somehow. Dad decided to move away from that location due to bad memories. He wanted us to live in a quiet neighborhood far from there, so he searched for a nice home in a quiet neighborhood and found our current home here in this neighborhood. It was surprisingly affordably priced, and we wondered why, but Dad wasn't in the mood to look a gift horse in the mouth, so he bought it. As we were moving into our new home, a neighbor came over and welcomed us to the neighborhood. She said, "Welcome to the neighborhood. Isn't this area so quiet and beautiful? Too bad it owes these nice qualities to a massacre." She looked dismayed. "Massacre?" Dad said. "Oh, didn't you know?" she said. "Yes, the Draco family used to live here. One night, Mr. Draco went mad, killed his whole family, and then committed suicide. A little morbid, isn't it? I figured the realtor would have told you about that. That's why the real estate prices here are so cheap. Very few people would move into a house with such a macabre history. Oh, one more thing. I wouldn't go out after sunset if I were you." "Why not?" Dad asked. The neighbor hesitated, pondering if she should say any more. Finally, she said, "Well, everyone here has adopted the habit of going to sleep early. I used to drink my favorite tea on the porch at sunset, but one night I heard a loud, moaning voice come from out of nowhere. It scared the bejesus out of me, and I stopped being out after sunset after that." This story gave me shivers. So I went to my bedroom and locked all the windows. I imagined, I hope it was my imagination, that I heard voices outside all night. The next day, Dad went to work. When he came home at the end of the day, I told him that I'd heard voices all night, and he looked worried. He told me that he was going to have to work from dawn till dusk, but he promised to try to finish early whenever he could. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I searched the internet looking for information on the Draco family. There were a lot of anecdotes and even eyewitness accounts of Mr. Draco's ghost haunting this area. This had caused many people to move out of this neighborhood, which is why it was so peaceful and quiet and inexpensive to live here. I resolved to get to the bottom of this matter and prove or disprove it once and for all, but I would need help. A friend of mine named Hall lived not too far away, and I knew that he was obsessed with the supernatural, so I told him about our haunted neighborhood and the ghost of Mr. Draco. He told me that he had heard about this legend before and was excited at an opportunity to look into it deeper. So we gathered some tools, and he brought some spell books in case we should confront a ghost. Personally, I didn't believe in spells, but better safe than sorry, so I humored Hall. One day, we waited until sunset and sat on the front porch of my house and waited. Sure enough, just after the sky turned dark, we heard a low moaning sound. We felt mild tremors in the ground. The sound gradually grew a little louder. We were shaking with fear, almost as badly as the ground was shaking with tremors. Hall screwed up some courage and said that we had to ignore our fear and start digging into the ground where the voice was coming from. The deeper we dug, the louder the sound became. Suddenly, a blast of water jetted up out of the ground. We dropped our shovels and ran like bats out of, well, we ran fast. After a few minutes, when we had regained our breath and slowed down our heart rates, we built up the courage to go back to investigate. As we approached the hole, we laughed mightily. We had ruptured a weakened water pipe that had been making horrendous flow and water hammer noises. When Dad got home, we told him we had solved the mystery of the legend of the Draco family curse. One night, Mr. Draco went mad, killed his whole family, and then committed suicide. A little morbid, isn't it?
Hello, my name is Benjamin and I'm 17 years old. I am sitting in a court waiting to hear my sentence, my punishment. When you listen to my story, you may pity me. My story started 3 years ago when my parents died in a train crash. My father was a businessman, and my mother was just a housewife. The news of their death was a big shock to me because I couldn't imagine my life without them. I was forced to move in with my grandparents. The hardest period of my life was about to start. My relationship with them wasn't that close. They lived in a city far away from my home, so I visited them in the past only a few days every year. When I heard my friends talking about the generosity of their grandparents, I wondered why, because mine never gave me any presents or showed me any kindness at all. My grandparents lived austere lives, so living with them was hard for me. They were stingy and cheap. Despite living in a villa, we all ate plain meals that barely supplied me adequate nourishment. In addition, we only ate one meal a day. I was always hungry. My room was infested with insects. The furniture was worn and torn. They paid the servant a minimal wage, so her work was minimal as well. I would always sneak into the kitchen to steal anything I could find in the fridge to eat. When I asked my grandparents why they were living so minimally, they said it was because they were saving money for the future. When they eventually figured out that I was stealing food from the refrigerator, they locked it closed at night. Do you believe that? One day, when I entered the study to speak with Grandpa, his safe was open and I glimpsed gold bars, a hefty pile of cash, and a mound of jewelry. When he saw me enter, he slammed the safe closed and gave me a cold look. At midnight, I happened to go to the bathroom, and while returning to my bedroom, I overheard Grandpa say, "Eat fast before he wakes up." I looked through a slot in the door to see them eating delicious food. Grandma said, "I don't know why you insisted on letting him move in with us." He replied, "Well, I couldn't let people see me abandon an orphaned grandson." She said, "I wish I could wake up one day and find him gone." Her words were like a knife through my heart. I decided then and there that they deserved to die. I wished that they had died instead of my parents. I waited until they went to sleep. Then I entered their room, took the key from their bedside, went to the safe, and stole all their money, gold, and jewelry, and put it in my backpack. Then I loosened a heating gas fitting in their bedroom, allowing it to leak into their room. Then I exited, closed the door, and sealed the bottom of the door with a towel. The next morning I took a bus to another town, intending to take the train to get even further away. In the meantime, the police discovered the death of my grandparents. They also discovered that there were security cameras around their villa that had recorded everything I did. As I sat there in the train station, I saw this news on a TV in the waiting area. They were showing my face from earlier news stories when my parents had died in the train crash. Everyone around me was looking at me. It seemed I was a dead ringer for the murder suspect. I was arrested, taken to court, tried, and found guilty on 2 counts of cold-blooded murder. So here I sit, waiting to hear my sentence. I am ready for any punishment. I feel no remorse. Given another chance, I would do it again. I adore detective adventures and solving puzzles that others can't. I'm crazy about this. I love challenges and mysteries. I'm Ramon. But my father's nickname for me is Megamind. I'm 14 years old, and I'm typically ranked number 1 in my class every year. I have become famous for solving riddles. Many comers have tried to unseat me, but all have failed. I love to examine minute details. But let me get on with telling you my story. One hot summer, we had just finished our exams at school and were going on summer break. So I organized a trip to the beach with my friends. Beach weather is amazing. Clear skies, cool ocean breezes, sand, and sun. Just amazing. One day, before my beach trip, my mother handed me a letter from my grandmother. I was surprised and thought it was a little weird because Granny owned a hotel in the surrounding area nearby. It had wonderful views all around it. I had opened the letter, which read, "Dear Ramon, how are you? I hope you're enjoying your summer break. Would you mind spending a couple of days with me? I have a serious matter that I would like to discuss with you. Granny." Initially, I thought that it was probably some silly matter, but then my inner voice told me that it might be important. I was conflicted between going on my beach trip or visiting my granny. I decided to visit Granny first. She was family after all, so off I went. Though my grandmother lived in a beautiful area, the closer I got to the hotel, the more my inner voice was nagging me. When I arrived at the hotel, Granny was waiting for me. She smiled and hugged me. I had missed her so much. She had company. Raul, her maintenance man, and Malika, her housekeeper and assistant. There weren't any guests in the hotel at the time, and I asked her why. Her face changed, and she said that was what she wanted to speak to me about. So we went to her room to talk. She then proceeded to tell me that the hotel was haunted. "Haunted?" I exclaimed. "What makes you think that?" Granny said, "The hotel has evil spirits that frighten the guests at night." I didn't want to believe it, but I knew Granny was a rational person. I suspected there was more to this than meets the eye, so I decided to investigate this intriguing mystery. On my first night at the hotel, I waited until midnight. Then I lit a candle and walked through the halls of the hotel. There were photos on the wall, and I could hear whispering and the rustle of the leaves outside. It was a little spooky and unsettling, and made my blood run cold. Suddenly, I heard laughing on both sides of the hotel, and a shadow passed quickly in front of my eyes. Unnerved, I quickly returned to my room, where soon afterwards I heard something scratching on my door. I kept thinking to myself, I am not afraid. I am not afraid. Then the door began opening slowly. I saw a hand on the doorknob. Then the owner of the hand came into view. It was a cloaked, headless man holding a candle. I fainted. The next day, I woke up to find Granny and Malika standing beside me. Granny told me that I had been sleeping a long time. I asked what had happened, and they told me they heard me scream and came to my aid. When they found me, I was unconscious on the floor. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. It was Raul bringing me a drink. That was when I noticed something strange about Raul's face. It was emotionless. Then I glanced at his hands as I accepted the drink from him. That night, I again walked around the hotel. I found some steps at the end of a corridor that led to the basement. Down in the basement, I opened a maintenance door and found a tape recorder and a pile of clothes on a table. Suddenly, the lights went out. I was groping around in the dark and trying to find my way back when I heard the laughing again. Still, I continued stumbling ahead through the dark. I stepped on an electrical line and tore it off the wall. I returned to my room. My door opened slowly. I was hiding behind the door. I grabbed the loose electrical detonator and touched it to the doorknob. It was live, and I heard a grunt from the owner of the hand on the other side of the door as he or she was shocked. And I heard him or her fall to the floor. It took me a while to find the electrical panel, but I managed to get the lights back on. When I did, I found Raul laying unconscious on the floor next to the doorknob that I had electrified. I called Granny and Malika down to the basement. Granny asked what had happened. I replied, "Granny, you really need to screen your employees better. Raul was your ghost." Granny looked shocked and asked me what made me think that. I explained that the hand on my drink today was the same hand I saw on the headless ghost. that opened my hotel room door the night before. I also found tools, a tape recorder, and some ghost clothes down here in the basement. In addition, I found the earphones that had been placed around the hotel. Granny was shocked. Raul woke up about that time, and she grilled Raul. "Why are you scaring all my guests away, Raul?" He said, "This hotel used to belong to my family, but you bought it from my grandfather. Well, I wanted it back. Please forgive me." Malika said, "We have to call the police." But I said, "No, wait, I have an idea. Let's renovate and reopen the hotel with a new name. The Haunted Hotel. Our advertising slogan will be, spend a night in a haunted hotel." Raul can do his ghost thing with the whispers and the laughing. Why, he can even flicker the lights off and on at a random time once or twice a night just to give the hotel a spooky atmosphere. The idea proved to be a big hit. The haunted hotel attracted many tourists, and Granny's business prospered. I had a nice holiday and still managed to fit in my trip to the beach on my summer break.
Do you remember me? Probably not. I'm the girl that can see the future from Wendy's story. I cannot use my real name for safety purposes. For now, call me Sarah. I might have sounded evil or even crazy in Wendy's story, but believe me, this is not even close to the truth. Let me tell you about myself. I come from an extremely strict family. I'm not allowed to have friends, I'm not allowed to leave the house except for school, and I'm barely allowed to access the internet. I live with my mom, my dad, and my much younger brother. I wouldn't say we're homeless, but we are poor. I discovered my power when I saved my mom's life one time. I was only a kid, and we were picking up my brother from daycare. Right before my mom crossed the street, I blacked out and had my very first vision. I ran out of the car and screamed for her to stop. The second she froze in her place, there was a car accident. She could have died. She cried and hugged me but never cared to ask how it happened. We're not a close family, so I never told anyone. I kept having those visions ever since. Years later, I learned how to control them. The few minutes of internet I was allowed, I always tried to look for a reason why or how I got my power. I never got an answer. I needed a distraction because I felt lost and like I did not belong. Now that I'm finally in high school, I asked my parents if I could have a part-time job after school. They never gave me any money, and to be honest, I needed some. I knew they were going to say no, but to my surprise, they agreed on one condition, that I give them half of my paycheck. I agreed. I got a job as a waitress in a local restaurant, and it was weird dealing with new people, but it was also so exciting. I quickly made a couple of friends who worked with me. I couldn't bring myself to trust them, but at least I had someone to talk to. One day at the restaurant, I heard some customers talking about something called the dark web. I wondered what it was. After my shift, I casually mentioned it to one of my colleagues. He explained everything to me. It was on my mind day and night. It sounded like a place full of weird people, just like me. With my first paycheck, I bought a new phone and kept it a secret from my parents. I immediately used it to access the dark web. It didn't look scary to me. I entered the chat room and decided I wanted to tell my secret to a stranger. You know what they say. Confide your heart to a stranger. The guy seemed harmless, and he actually listened to me. Next day, I found an email from an unknown address. It was a picture of my house. I got so scared, and I turned off my phone. I went to school, and when I came back, my phone was turned on. There was another email, and it read, "You're going to help us accomplish a few missions. You'll get your share of the money. Meet me at this address at 11 p.m. tonight. If you try to act smart, you'll regret it." I had no idea what to do, but I knew I had to go. I snuck out that night and met the person from the email. He wore a mask, and he threw some pictures at me. They were pictures of my family members. The first thing he said was, "Do you want them dead?" I shook my head. He said, "A quick test. What's going to happen in a few seconds? I opened my eyes wide and said, "A black car will come pick us up." He nodded his head in approval. He blindfolded me and put me in the car. After a few minutes, he said, "You're coming with me. The guys here will do the work, and you will guide us." I nodded my head, even though I didn't know what he was talking about. Much later, they drove me back to the same address, gave me some cash, and threw me out the car. I removed the blindfold, and it was already morning. I had to run back home before my parents wake up, and that was the first of many, many missions to come. For a minute there, I enjoyed the thrill and the cash. Sometimes it was too much, and sometimes I had to skip school. And of course, I quit my job. I worked for them for what seemed like a year, until what I feared the most happened. The gang I worked for asked me to help them track a person so they can kill him. It was not a matter of choice. It's either I help them or they kill me and my whole family. I tried to ignore the email. However, an hour later, a server appeared on my phone. It was titled, "We See You," and it was full of pictures from inside my house. 30 seconds later, the page dropped and disappeared. I can't even tell the police. I can't do anything. That is when it occurred to me that the only untraceable person in the whole world is Wendy. Next day at school, I looked all around for her. I finally ran into her in the bathroom. I couldn't utter a word. I only had one hope, that she would hear my thoughts. I focused as hard as I can to think loud and clear. Wendy was fixing her lipstick in the mirror, and after a few minutes, she dropped her lipstick and looked at me. I begged her inside my head to keep her mouth shut. She blinked twice and left. The mission is happening in 24 hours. What if Wendy can't help? I didn't get a second of sleep that night. I know you think I'm a bad person, and I won't argue much, but killing someone was crossing the line. I wanted to get out of this long ago, and I couldn't. Now I have to help them kill an innocent person? Time just flew by. I got an email, and I had to drag myself to meet them. Their big boss looked at me and said, "This time, you'll get cash and a fake degree. So stop acting like a baby and get to work." I nodded. I thought about giving them wrong information, but I knew I'll get caught. A sniper was waiting for a signal from me to shoot. I was only a few feet away from the victim. I was shaking nonstop. Right before I gave the signal, I heard a police siren. I looked at the sniper and he was about to shoot. I jumped and knocked the innocent man down, but I got shot in the arm. In the blink of an eye, the gang disappeared into thin air. Police called paramedics, and to my surprise, Wendy was here. She practically saved my life. Or are they going to find me and kill me and my family? The police confiscated my phone. My wound was properly taken care of, and they called my parents. To this point, I was not interrogated yet. My parents came, and they couldn't look me in the eyes. A police officer explained what happened, and told them, "She's staying with us until further notice." And they all left. Well, except for Wendy. Her dad was cool enough to let her stay with me until police asked her to leave. She looked at me and said, "You owe me one, gangster." And we both laughed. A police officer came and informed us that Wendy will have to stay here as well, for her own safety. She looked at me and whispered, "We'll have a gang of our own when all of this is over." I smiled and didn't say anything. Wendy's face got serious and she asked me, "How am I gonna explain to them what happened in details? We cannot just tell the police we have superpowers." Before I could answer, a police officer came in and took her for questioning. Now, we're both in trouble with the dark web gang and the police. Wendy came back and they took me. She whispered, "We're doomed." I thought to myself so that Wendy could hear me say, "Oh, you think we're doomed? Wait until the gang finds us, and they will." I left the room feeling scared as ever. Do you guys think we'll ever be safe again? Do you think I got Wendy in trouble? Can I ever make up for the mess I made? If you want to know what happened to us, Let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe.
Hello, my name is Kate. Now I'm going to say this. I am by no means a saint, and the only reason I brought this up is later in the story. So, I dated this guy in high school for 2 years. He was the love of my life, and I planned on marrying him. His dad became super controlling, and eventually he forced us to break up. He immediately got into a relationship with another girl, and I moved on. Later on, I met this guy who we will call Max, and he was a mix between country and scene. He liked artists like Lil Peep and also was in love with horses. He had a girlfriend who lived across the country, but we stayed friends. They eventually broke up, and naturally, we both grew closer. Dear God, I regret ever saying yes to going out with him. The first 2 months, they were constant fighting. He wanted us to visit his ex-girlfriend because she was failing college and addicted to coke while we were together. He would sometimes text her while he was at my house or while we were at dinner, but eventually he quit. The next few months were okay at best. He would constantly start fights with my male friends and even assumed I was cheating on him with one friend who at the time did have a crush on me. But I'm a very loyal person who went as far as to put more of my time into hanging out with my boyfriend than my friends. Eventually, we went on a cruise and he got high with a group of girls and kissed one of them. I cut it off and went on to date others. So, he texted me 3 months after breaking up, saying he wants to talk and apologize for what he did. I was still in love with him, so I agreed and we set up a time for when he could come over. I knew instantly when he pulled into my driveway that I was going to regret ever responding. There was no hug, no I miss you, none of that. Instead, he walks up to me, looks me in the eye, and says, I want to get this out of the way. I've dated a lot of people since we broke up. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. I mean, I did the same when we broke up. So I kind of agreed to being just friends and never go back to talking about getting back together for now. But then comes the bullshit. He calls me one night and says, Hey, I want to get back with you. Because honestly, wandering around is boring, and I don't want to jump into things instantly. And I was wondering if dating without labels would be okay with you. When I asked him to elaborate, he replied, as in, I can still go to dinner with other girls, you can go to dinner with other guys, and we'll see what happens. Needless to say, I hung up without saying a word. Told him thanks, but no thanks. You are not who you used to be, and I'm not interested anymore. Bonus chapter. He stopped a few weeks, but he would periodically send me pictures of him at parties or on dates with other girls or pictures of his private areas. Anyways, ever since he has been blocked on everything, but I just thought I would share this with you. This is a shout out to every girl out there. Please find someone that's worth your love and affection, not someone who wants to play with it.
Hi, I am Ralph. I am 19 years old. I have simple secret that I like my mother. Don't judge me, just listen to my story. I had a quiet family, kind mother and loving father. We had stable lives in our far state. But as you know, there is no place for happy life in our world. There was a turning point in life, and it came quickly with me. It was a nice day in our garden, me, my mother, and my father. My father was sitting under a tree reading a book. Me and my mother were playing football. Suddenly, Mom overshot and the ball went into the street. I was too young to think. I just ran quickly to pick the ball. There was a fast car. The driver was screaming at me, "Stay away!" But I did not. My mother sacrificed herself to rescue me. I fainted, and when I woke up, I saw my mother's blood everywhere. My father was crying. There were a lot of people. Our lives changed to be gloomy. He was surrounding me by many looks. I thought he blamed me because of her death. He was so sad. I left my friends. I did not talk with people. I was just 8 years old. I was thinking of killing myself. I would like to escape from this blame. Suddenly, my father decided to marry. I shocked because I could not imagine any other woman instead of my mother at home. He said in a firm voice, "She will be at home soon." He asked me to be a good boy. I entered my room and started crying. I could not imagine. But I decided to annoy her. When she prepared food, I immediately threw it. Her only reaction was a kind smile. While my father was staying at home, I insisted by bothering her by doing a lot of noisy things. My father was shouting, and she always protected me. I said to myself, maybe she is a good woman, and she loves me. One time, while she was cooking, she had a phone call from a hospital. It was an urgent matter. I was watching TV. She came in to me and said, "Ralph, my sister is in the hospital and I have to go. Can you take care of cooking?" I did not care. She smiled and went out. I went to the kitchen and turned up the heat to burn the food. But the fire did not just burn the food, it started to burn home too. There was fire everywhere. I could not breathe. Then I fainted. I woke up, but I did not know where am I. I looked around and saw my stepmother sleeping. She looked exhausted, and there was cinder on her face. Suddenly the door opened, and I discovered that I was in the hospital. The nurse said, "Get well soon." I asked her what happened. She told me that there was a big fire at our home, and my mother is a brave woman. She entered home and rescued me in the last moment. I looked at her. I discovered that she is a great woman. She woke up suddenly and asked me, "Are you okay?" I hugged her and cried. I said, "Sorry for everything." She said, "It is okay. I can understand." I considered her my mother. I started to help her in everything at home. She helped me a lot. I supported her a lot until her last illness. Today, I'm standing in her gravesite. I want to tell her that I love her a lot.
Taking responsibility is a great thing, especially when you can see the result of your efforts in front of your eyes and when your family is so proud of you. But sometimes you are forced to hide your achievements to make your family happy. This is what I had to do. My name is Kareem. I'm 21 years old, and I would like to tell you my story. When I was 15, I lived with my mother and my little brother, Chris, in a small apartment in a neighborhood close to a hospital called Central Hospital. I was working in that hospital at this time. Chris was the most important person in my life because my father died when he was just 2 months old, causing him to become my responsibility. I had previously worked in grocery stores, clothing stores, and in an office as an office boy. Then one of my friends told me that Central Hospital had an opening for a doctor's assistant and that they would train the new hire for the job. Thus began my work as a nurse. I was a hard worker, so I became one of the top nurses in the hospital. But my dreams were bigger than this because I wanted my family to have a good standard of living. Unfortunately, my current low salary couldn't get us where I wanted us to be. One day, Gabriel, one of my colleagues at the hospital, called me. We didn't know each other well because we had only greeted each other in passing in the hallway. So we met and I sat down with him. He told me he had been watching me closely for a long time, and he knew that I desired more money than what I was making, and that this was what had prompted him to speak with me. He told me that he could help me earn a lot more money. I asked how, and he explained that some people need some stuff from the hospital, and we could help them get it. Medicine, you mean? I asked. No, he answered. He shifted his position and moved his head closer to mine and whispered in a low voice, "Some people with serious illnesses need replacement organs for organ transplant surgery. Others, who are healthier and more fortunate, are willing to sell their organs to help these poor, unfortunate people while making a profit for themselves at the same time." "Are you talking about trading human organs?" I posited. I was hesitant. Many thoughts raced through my mind. If these people died, there would always be more patients. Honesty and integrity in my work were essential to keep my job. I could get fired and even arrested for getting involved in such skullduggery. But I could make a lot of money. Much to my chagrin, My greed muted all other concerns, and I accepted his offer. Every day, Gabriel would ask me to obtain an organ. I would wait until midnight, then sneak into the morgue and steal an organ from a recently deceased patient and sell it to Gabriel for money. Our arrangement worked like a charm. I made loads of money. I moved my family into a new apartment, enrolled my brother in a better school, and saw joy and satisfaction in my family's eyes. Then, one day, Gabriel asked me to get him a kidney for a patient with an urgent and serious condition. I searched the morgue, but couldn't find an identical match for the patient's kidney profile. I noticed that a living patient, a man with a serious heart condition, happened to be a good kidney match for our needs, but Gabriel needed a replacement kidney in 2 days. What could I do? I told myself that this patient with the heart condition case would likely die sooner rather than later. So, why not end his suffering a little early? So I called Gabriel and told him that he would get his kidney after midnight. I entered the patient's room and gave him an empty injection, basically causing an air embolism. A few minutes later, a nurse came in and found him dead. Once they moved his body to the morgue, I removed his kidney. I had unwittingly become the angel of death. I felt no remorse for my actions, though, until I met a patient named Catherine, who had developed a serious brain tumor. Her bad fortune made Gabriel ask for a new heart for a kid, so I made up my mind to end Catherine's suffering. It was for a good cause, after all, right? That night, I entered her room quietly with a hypodermic needle in my hand. I held her hand and looked at her beautiful, innocent face. She did not deserve death, I thought to myself. Suddenly she woke up and asked me what I was doing. I told her that I was going to end her suffering, but she assured me that she most certainly did not want to die. I hesitated and thought about letting her live, but greed had firmly wrapped its icy steel fingers around my heart, and I gave her the injection with a steady hand. Just before she died, she said, "You will pay for your heinous deeds." At that moment, I heard an ambulance's siren and ran to the window to see what was going on. It seems there had been a horrible accident. A truck had crashed into a school bus. I watched the paramedics carry in the dead bodies of the students involved in the accident. Suddenly, my throat constricted and my heart skipped a beat. One of the dead students they were carrying in was my own little brother, Chris. I felt as if a knife had been driven into my heart. Why did this happen to me? I hadn't done anything wrong. I was saving people's lives and stopping the suffering of others. I didn't deserve this punishment. I screamed his name aloud several times while people around me watched me scream. Not only did my brother die that day, but my mother subsequently fell ill and went into a coma. My sins had come back to haunt and taunt me. Catherine's dying words stuck in my mind. You will pay for your heinous deeds. How I wish I could apologize to those whose lives I had taken.
Hi, I'm Camila. Have you ever experienced a life problem? I know everyone has their own problems, but imagine you had to hide something all your life. Do you know what it feels like? If not, let me tell you. My name is Camila. It means beautiful in Arabic, and I really am beautiful, or so I've been told. But I have a problem. I always wear a glove on my left hand, anywhere I go, because I'm too embarrassed to show it to anyone. This has become my life problem. You see, I've had 7 fingers on my left hand since birth. My family couldn't afford a surgery to remove these extra 2 fingers. It would have cost a lot of money, and I would have had to travel abroad because we didn't have clever doctors or good hospitals in my area. So I've been wearing a glove on my left hand since I was young, as a temporary solution for this problem. People always ask me about the glove, but I never answer. I just say that my fingers get cold. You would see me in the summer wearing a short, sleeveless blouse and a glove on my left hand. There were a lot of things I had to give up because of my hand. Once, I wanted to play gymnastics. My mom was okay with it, so I went to many places to train, but they all refused to accept me because of my 7-fingered hand. which they considered to be a problem. At school, my classmates would laugh and ridicule me a lot, so I never had a lot of friends, just a few. I got into the college of my dreams. I thought that people might stop this bullying, so I considered taking off the glove. But I was afraid, because I was going to join a new society, so I didn't. I went with the glove instead. I was surprised at the amount of bullying at college, more than I had ever seen. It was a good thing that I decided to wear my glove. There were a lot of bullies there. Then, something happened. It became a turning point in my life. One time, while I was standing and speaking with my friends, one of them suddenly pulled off my glove. This glove was old and wasn't very tight on my hand. I had been intending to buy a new one after school, but they all discovered my secret. Some were astonished, while others started making fun of me and bullying me. I stopped going to university for a whole week. People blamed me for something that wasn't my fault, but that was the story of my life. If I hid away now, I'd be in this mess forever. So I decided never to wear that glove again. I decided to face my fears. I am beautiful enough to live a good life. I decided to ignore all the bullies and take care of myself. I went to my college. I didn't care about people's opinions. I focused on my studies, had great success, and proved to myself and to others that I was not disabled. The disabled can't think or succeed. Later, when I was attending a lecture by a famous doctor, he noticed my hand and offered to operate on it and make it look normal. This surgery would be the first of its kind in my country, and I accepted. When I saw my hand after the surgery, I couldn't believe myself. Bullying can ruin people's lives, but as they say, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent.